All right, Logic fans, what's up? So this is our final video, 1.7c, the third video on 1.7, and section 1.7 ends with a discussion of an important notion which comes back in an important way in the next section, 1.8. So let's take a few minutes here to get used to this idea. So what we're doing here is we're defining what are called the 5 fundamental forms, and there's a couple aspects to this definition that a couple technical aspects to it that we'll go over, but it's nothing too bad once you see it. So basically, there's this whole world of forms. So your professor can pick, a form out of a hat, right? They could pick out this form. Here's a form. I don't know. Let's do this. So here's a form, right? And of course you could prove that this is a form by developing a form tree out of it. But out of the whole wide world of forms, and there are infinitely many of them, okay? There are tons of them, okay? There are 5 which we sort of select out as really, really important for all future work and understanding logic in general, bivalent logic. So the 5 that are of importance are these 5 right here. Not P, P and Q, P or Q, if P then Q, P if and only if Q. And as we'll see in section 1.8, the next section, we can define certain important concepts in terms of these. For example, anything that's a substitution instance of this form is going to be called a negation, and that's going to be important for future work. So this basically codifies negations. This codifies conjunctions. This codifies disjunctions. This codifies conditionals, and this codifies biconditionals. Notice this is not one of the 5 fundamental forms. It's not one of these. You have to be exactly one of these. Now, you could represent it this way too, not Q. That would be a fundamental form, not R. So the individual, the propositional variable that you use isn't as important, but it has to be exactly one of these. So to make sure you're understanding that, let's look at an example. Okay, so here's an example I've arranged for you. So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to go through each of these. Notice they're all forms, and you're supposed to tell me, is this form a fundamental form or not? Is this form a fundamental form or not? Is this form a fundamental form or not? If it is a fundamental form, identify which one it is. Okay, is it fundamental form 3? Is it fundamental form 4? Or is it just not a fundamental form at all? Pause now, give that a shot, and we'll come back and do it together. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to go through these on your own. This is a fundamental form. In fact, it is fundamental form 1. Okay, so again, the propositional variable doesn't matter. Okay, so A is a fundamental form, and it's fundamental form 1 in particular. What about B? Is B a fundamental form? No, it is not. Okay, it is not a fundamental form. That it has to be exactly this, disregarding which propositional variable you use, P, Q, R, or S. So the fact that it's an S is not a problem. It's the fact that it's got these 2 things here, and the only real candidate would have been this one, but it's got 2, and this one has to have 1. Okay. So as the idea is becoming clearer, feel free to pause and go through the rest to make sure you're understanding it. But C is not a fundamental form. Okay, it does not fit. So this is the best candidate, but it doesn't fit that one exactly. Okay, and contrastively, D does fit it perfectly. And in fact, if D had been, S and T, that would be a fundamental form as well. Okay, so moving on, E is not a fundamental form. Okay, not a fundamental form. F is a fundamental form. Okay, and in fact, it is fundamental form 3. Okay, it's this one. And let's see here. G is not a fundamental form. Not a fundamental form. H, however, is a fundamental form, and it is fundamental form 4. Okay, and I is not a fundamental form, but J is. So contrasting those two hopefully helps. Okay, J is a fundamental form, and it is fundamental form 5. Okay, Finally, this one's a bit of a trick question. This is not a fundamental form. Okay, we will have something more to say about these guys in the ensuing section 1.8. But make sure you're really getting this idea down, because as I'll emphasize in section 1.8, these are really important. So out of all the possible forms that your professor could write down on a piece of paper, and there's infinitely many of them, right? Just start cranking them out. For every single one of them, you can ask, is it a fundamental form or not? And, it has to be this one, or it has to be this one, or this one, or this one. Otherwise, it is not a fundamental form. And there are only 5 of them. We will see the reason for why we are emphasizing these 5 in particular out of the infinitely many possible forms in the ensuing section. All right, logic fans, that's it for this one. We'll see you on the next one. Keep practicing.